Welcome to the Creative Condition podcast, an ongoing series of conversations and considerations to help people understand and embrace their own unique creativity for fulfilling lives and brilliant careers. My name is Ben Talon. I'm an illustrator and author, and I bring 16 years of creative industry experience working with the New York Times, The Guardian, the Premier League, and more. And I invite designers, artists, psychologists, scientists, coaches, athletes, sensitivity experts, and all kinds of thought leaders to help us broaden our knowledge of creativity. Creativity is a fundamental pillar of human happiness, a vital ingredient in the solutions to our problems, but so often misunderstood. The show is supported by founding sponsor and B Corp, Illustration X. Take a look at their stunning range of illustrators and animators at illustrationx.com. If you like the music for the show, it's by Dirty Freud, who you can listen to now on Spotify and all good music streaming services. Hello and welcome back to the Creative Condition. For the wrap-up section this week, we are checking in with the episode with Sara Prinsloo, episode 241 of the Creative Condition podcast, and what we learned about creativity. So I hope you enjoyed this one. It was a further exploration of roots and background, and in Sara's case, working class background, much like myself, much like Professor Cal Chin, who I had on the show. I think of other recent guests, Gush Munday, founder of Bulletproof, had to go through a lot of adversity, a lot of racist bullying, having moved over from Delhi to the UK at a time of heightened racism. Suffered a lot of barriers in his career, but went on to found Bulletproof, using all of his $2,000 worth of savings to found the agency. Now one of the biggest ad agencies in the world. Very impressive, inspiring stuff. Many littered throughout the archive of this podcast. And today we're going to get into Sara's story, so I hope you enjoyed that show. The show is ever supported by Illustration X. Check out their global range of illustration and animation portfolios at illustrationx.com, and the Ukrainian Institute supporting the Ukrainian creative community, ui.org.ua. So let's get into it. Number one is what we learned about creativity is that communities and tribes help us to inform our identity. So this is something that is very pertinent in Sara's story. She talks of growing up in Hadfield, a suburb of Manchester, and a sort of door unlocked, nice community and a council estate where she grew up, and people talking to one another and playing out all hours. And I think those hours we spend in our youth doing that are really important because they help us, by virtue of spending time with other people, to flesh out who we are by responding subconsciously and consciously to how people treat us and behave around us, and how our humour is responded to, how our playfulness, our introversions, whatever those traits are, those natural traits we are born with, they're kind of fostered and incubated and grown, or even thwarted in some instances, in the communities in which we grow up. I do think it's really important for us to spend time around people at all times. We are social creatures. This is something I talk about in my coaching. I did a session for DNAD the other day, and we talked about no matter where you sit on that spectrum of introvert, extrovert, it's vitally important that you have some form of positive social relationships in your life, face-to-face communications. I know off the back of COVID, we kind of took our time to come out as a creative community, and I think it's been detrimental to people's confidence and happiness and belonging. In Sara's case, she talks about working in pubs and meeting characters like Shaun Ryder, and how music was always something back then, you know, talking 99, 2000, around then in the pubs, it had a strong focus, you know, open mic gatherings, and her dad being a big music fan and a musician himself and being exposed to that, and how it fostered a connection with culture. I think it's really, really important. We find so much in our relationships with other people, so it's something to bear in mind. Number two, documenting your lived experience is incredibly empowering, and can also be something of a responsibility to share what you see and what you go through in your life in an artistic way. Can be incredibly empowering, not just to you as the artist, but to other people who are the viewers and the imbibers of that work. You know, and I know when we're getting into those first bands and you make those first real connections with music or culture, oftentimes it's stuff that speaks to us, and it comes from a common lived experience, or something that in some way depicts the life that we are living or the struggles that we face. Really important. Sara's Trashy Barbie project is a wonderful example. You know, she recently showed it at Hillsborough Festival, and it was an invitation to come into a booth where Sarah had dressed up these big kind of Barbie dolls in a really, she describes it as trash, as trashy. I don't necessarily see it as that, or at least I don't see trashy as being derogatory. And I certainly know that Sarah doesn't see it as that, because it's part of her lived experience, growing up on a council estate, dressing the way she dresses, being a part of skating cultures and things like that. That was her version of trashy, but she's inviting people into her booth at the Hillsborough Festival to share with no judgment their own trashiness, because no matter what background we're from, upper class, middle class, working class, we all kind of have a degree of trashiness and realness and authenticity that we, whether it's trudging around in our pyjamas in the home with our loved one, or whether it's, the way we behave with our mates after a bottle of Prosecco or something. And it's really, really cool. And it's a great example of that. And, so whatever your lived experience, sharing it through artistry is really empowering to you and to others. Number 3, creativity must find its way through our real life's maze. So Sarah is a great example, and I really resonate with her own experience of going to uni. She went to uni in London, whereas I studied in Preston. But all the same, we both came from working class families and backgrounds, which meant we had to work jobs while we studied at university. We didn't have any kind of backing or savings from families. Again, not a badge of honour, not running anyone down who did have that, but what it meant for us was that we had to take on jobs and we had to work around the clock on our studies. We had to make our creativity flow despite very real life toils of working, in my case, in off licenses, in bookshops, in factories. Same for Sarah. She had to pay them bills, so she had to take on gigs, and to this day, she works full time. She's recently worked as a technician at the Sheffield University. She worked lecturing on, I think, design courses in, was it Hadfield where she lived? Hereford. I think it was Hereford. She'll correct me if I'm wrong anyway. But she worked as a lecturer and as a technician. And her art happens around that in her life. And she's also a brilliant mum of 2 boys. So to steer that ship and remain creative, it brings its own challenges. And I always recommend to people to create a tiered to-do list. I find it really helps. It helped me during early parenthood. And by that I mean have a list of tasks you can be doing when you've got no energy, when you're knackered, when you've had a bad night's sleep, when you don't have much motivation. So that might be admin tasks. It might be tasks that don't really tax your creativity, but they're more process driven. Have a medium list, so you're somewhere in between where you might get bursts of energy. You might have a couple of hours here and there to capitalise, and then find a place to focus yourself on a task that maybe has a little bit of creativity. And then a list of things, say, for example, you've got a couple of days in a row where you can commit to a bigger project where you do have a little bit of energy. Have a list of bigger strokes and strides forward you can take on that. But, it's real life. We all have it going on, and we all have to make our creativity work around it. And really, even if we did have Eden, that kind of blank canvas, no responsibilities, all the money in the world, would we really get the results like Trashy Barbie and beautiful projects like that? Because without the kind of constraints and the battles, I don't think we get that. Number 4, parents have to enable creativity. In today's world, and for the large part of history, creativity and artistry has not been valued by our cultures because there's too much unknown, and the unknown is the biggest fear for humans. So what that means is, in today's education, with the likes of the STEM subjects in the EBAC getting all the focus and the arts being marginalised and pushed out, tutors don't get it. Maybe art teachers don't get it. Some do, some don't. But really, you can't rely on the education system to foster your kids' creativity. So it is your responsibility as a parent to garner an understanding and an appreciation of the value of artistic expression. I read a thing this morning in The Guardian, and it was about the UK being quite an unhappy place for teenagers. The stats show that teenage dissatisfaction with their lives and unhappiness is doubling most of Europe's countries, and I think Amsterdam was top of that list in a positive sense, and it showed that supporting the home, supporting education, and belonging and empowerment were big ticks on that list. School isn't really doing that for our kids. It isn't teaching them how to self-express, and they're being bombarded with so much information. And, I saw another video this morning about kids, particularly blokes, young men, being exposed to violent and shocking videos on social media because of the algorithms. It's horrendous, really, what kids are faced with today. They're having to grow up fast because they're exposed to all this bullshit online. And then they're not being helped with self-expression. They're not being shown how to process any of those emotions. So of course they're feeling down in the dumps and anxious and stressed and high alert. And it's really not good. I do fear for that next generation, particularly the kids coming out of COVID. So parents, it's really important to get out of your own bullshit and head when it comes to the perception of arts as something of a luxury or a hobby. It's really not. It's a critical tool, and I will go as far as to say it's more important than it's ever been for processing mental stimulation and the things we're exposed to. Sarah is a wonderful example of that, of course, as a mum who's an artist and, giving her two boys the tools, as we explained, and doing work in her community. I think she's wonderful for doing that. I really do. And it's really important stuff. It's something I'm trying to do myself. I mentioned Gush Monday earlier in the show of Bulletproof. I know he's doing work in schools at the moment to reach young people and show them that there is a way, there is a great career that can pay well to be had in the creative industries. Number 5, recklessness and abandon is a volatile part of creativity. Now, this one can go either way, because Sarah talks about having a certain recklessness, and it is something that's maybe tied to a working class upbringing because it's escapism, things like drinking and drugs and extreme behaviour. Very interesting. I've had this myself, in younger years. I used to go out and probably drink far too much. There was a certain kind of fuck it mentality to the way that I created my artwork, the projects I would take on. I have that under much better wraps now. I'm a happier person. I barely drink. I've found ways to harness those extreme emotions without intoxicants, but a lot of people don't. And in my book, I shared a story about ex-WWE champion wrestler Shawn Michaels, who you might remember him if you watched wrestling in the 90s, but he's considered to be the greatest in-ring talent of all time by a lot of people. Now, he went through a phase where he was addicted to pain medication, and he talks about abandon as being something that when you work in a creative arena, that lack of care for self, that lack of fear can be rocket fuel. My point is, how do you harness that? Because I believe that it's unsustainable. If you're operating with those kind of emotions, it's very make or break, and it is in the long-term trajectory. Working under the likes of fight or flight or that kind of panic mindset is really unsustainable. In short bursts, it can make for the likes of great music. Musicians in the past and rock stars who've gone down that road have produced magic, but ultimately I feel they've also come a cropper because of it. So it's a really interesting one, is abandon. It's something that's on my brand new Anatomy of Creativity map, which is about to be uploaded to my shop that you can get hold of. Not a cynical plug there, it's a part of the coaching model that I'm doing and a part of this ecosystem here on the creative condition that I am creating. But it's a really interesting concept and something worth considering, because the negative emotion spectrum is really powerful when you can harness it, but abandon is kind of a standalone one that is hard to harness and can pay dividends sometimes, but it's the jury's out on that one. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I did do an episode with Sam de Cruz, going back to episode 184 of this podcast, talking about creativity versus monsters, because Sam did this awesome project. She does a lot of benevolent work around things like homelessness and addiction. She was the daughter of a father who had problems with alcohol, and we talked about her Child Of project, which is supporting people who'd suffered from that kind of addiction in their parents, and that's an interesting one too. So it is something that's come up on the show before, and I did quote Sam in the book when exploring that issue of abandon. But there you have it. That's a little wrap up for this week's show with the wonderful Sara Prinsloo. If you haven't listened yet, you can go back and listen to the highlights episode of the full length episode. Sarah is one of my favourite artists. I've got her Lego sculpture on my shelf. I've got her zines, which she actually published my very first published short fiction story, which was about finding a condom in an old mill. So there you go. Goes back to the point of channeling that lived experience, doesn't it? Thanks for listening, guys. Catch you up soon for all these brilliant new episodes I've got in the bag. We've got some great interviews to come and bring your way soon. Do leave us a little rating, review and subscription if you get a chance. The Creative Condition book is out now. bentallenwriter.com/shop for your paperback signed copies, or Amazon Kindle store for the ebooks. Thanks for checking in, guys. Have a great week. Talk soon.